I didn't even want to be a part of her wedding. Not really. It's not that I didn't care about my sister's happiness, I did. In my own way, but everything about her wedding had felt like an obligation from the moment she first brought it up. Samantha, you're going to be my maid of honor, right? She had asked, eyes wide and pleading, as though there had never been any other choice. Of course, I'd said, because that's what people do. That's what you say when your only sister is getting married. You say, of course, and smile, even if there's a knot in your stomach. A deep, gnawing sense that nothing about this was going to go smoothly. I love Rebecca, but Rebecca has always been a perfectionist. Growing up, she was the one with the color-coded schedules, the matching outfits, the report cards full of straight A's. I was the younger sister who barely managed to keep her room clean, let alone coordinate a wedding. But here I was, thrust into the role of maid of honor, expected to plan everything, execute everything, and, worst of all, keep her happy. It was a thankless job from the start. I could tell, even in the early days of planning, that nothing I did was going to meet her expectations. Rebecca had a vision, a very specific vision, and every time I suggested something that didn't fit into that vision, I could see the disappointment flash in her eyes. No, Sam, the flowers have to be peonies. I told you, I don't want roses. Roses are too predictable, she'd say, flipping through bridal magazines like she was preparing for a final exam. I felt like I was constantly walking on eggshells, afraid to make even the smallest mistake. Every time I did, her disapproval hung in the air like a dark cloud ready to burst. One wrong move, and she'd be on me, sharp and biting, reminding me of just how incapable she thought I was. The bridal shower was one of the worst moments. I had spent hours curating the perfect event, ordering food from her favorite caterer, hand-making decorations, and even convincing our mom to dig up some of Rebecca's embarrassing childhood photos to hang as a quirky centerpiece. I thought it was a fun touch, something that would make her smile. But when she walked in and saw the photos, her face turned red, and not in a cute, blush at the memory way. Sam, are you serious? She hissed through clenched teeth, pulling me aside so her friends wouldn't hear. You put those pictures up? I told you I didn't want any of that old stuff. I wanted it to look classy, not like some backyard barbecue. My heart sank. It felt like all the work I'd put in was for nothing. I had tried to make it special, tried to make it personal, but it wasn't the version of special Rebecca had in mind. And then there was the dress fitting. I had been running late that day because of work, something that I had explained to her 100 times. I didn't get to set my own schedule. I wasn't the bride who could just take off whenever I wanted. But when I arrived, breathless and apologetic, she was already in her gown, standing on the pedestal, staring at herself in the mirror with a frown etched into her face. I told you to be here an hour ago, she snapped as soon as she saw me. I'm sorry. You're always sorry, Sam. This is my wedding, and you can't even show up on time for this? Her voice was ice cold, and the women in the boutique awkwardly pretended not to notice. I could feel their judgment, feel the heat rising in my cheeks as her words hit me like a slap. I stood there, speechless, as she turned back to the mirror, inspecting her reflection with a critical eye. The sales associate fumbled with the lace on her train, looking like she wanted to disappear. But Rebecca didn't stop there. And look at this, she continued, tugging at the fabric on the bodice. This isn't what I wanted. I don't even know why I let you pick the boutique. You can't make a single decision without screwing it up. That was the moment I knew something inside me was cracking. I had held it together for months, biting my tongue, nodding along with her endless demands, convincing myself that once the wedding was over, things would go back to normal. But it wasn't just a crack anymore. It was a full-blown fracture, and it was only getting wider. Then came the invitations, those cursed invitations that, in hindsight, had probably been the final straw. I had spent an entire weekend designing them, going back and forth with the printer to make sure everything was just right. But I missed one tiny, insignificant thing, a typo in the RSVP line. Just one letter off. It didn't even affect the meaning. But to Rebecca, it was the equivalent of ruining the entire wedding. Sam, she screeched when she called me that night. I could barely understand her through her hysterics. You ruined everything. Do you know how many people are getting these? How many of my friends will see that you can't even spell attendance correctly? How could you let this happen? Her words hit me like shards of glass. Sharp and relentless. I tried to explain that it wasn't a big deal, that no one would even notice. But she wouldn't listen. Of course you wouldn't think it's a big deal. She spat. You never care about anything. You can't even do this one thing right. Sam, it's like you don't even want to be a part of this wedding. And maybe that was it. Maybe deep down, I didn't. Maybe I had grown so tired of trying to meet her impossible standards that I couldn't see the point anymore. But I didn't say any of that. I just listened, taking her verbal punches, waiting for her to tire herself out. By the time I hung up the phone, I was exhausted, emotionally drained. It felt like I had been holding my breath for months, waiting for the storm to pass. But the clouds just kept gathering, darker and darker. I tried to remind myself that this was just who Rebecca was. She was a perfectionist. She wanted everything to be flawless. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I was losing myself in the process, becoming more and more invisible with each passing day. As the wedding day drew nearer, the tension between us grew unbearable. Every time I saw her name pop up on my phone, my stomach twisted in knots, wondering what fresh criticism she had in store for me. I had never felt so small, so unappreciated. I had tried to do everything right, to make her happy, but no matter what I did, it was never enough. Nothing was ever enough for Rebecca. I hadn't realized the gravity of my mistakes until the day of the wedding rehearsal. That was when everything fell apart. The church was empty save for the wedding party and a few of Rebecca's close friends. I stood off to the side, clutching my clipboard like it was some kind of shield against her fury. I had meticulously planned every detail of the rehearsal. Everything was supposed to run like clockwork, but things had already begun to spiral out of control. First, the organist was late. Then the flower girl threw a tantrum and refused to walk down the aisle. I was trying to manage it all, but Rebecca's sharp voice cut through every attempt I made to control the chaos. Sam, where's the officiant? He was supposed to be here half an hour ago. I don't know, Becca. I'm trying to call him now. I can't believe you didn't confirm with him earlier. You're supposed to be handling this. I bit my lip hard, fighting back the retort that was bubbling up in my throat. Rebecca was pacing now, her ivory rehearsal dress swishing angrily as she moved back and forth across the front of the church. I should have known better than to let you handle everything, she snapped, her voice loud enough to echo in the empty pews. You can't even organize your own life, let alone a wedding. Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. But I stayed silent. This wasn't new territory. Rebecca had always been quick to criticize, quick to point out every flaw, every shortcoming. I was used to it, had been used to it my entire life. But something about this moment, standing there in that church, made the sting sharper. Maybe if you actually cared about this wedding, things wouldn't be such a mess. She continued, her voice rising with every word. But you don't, do you? You've always been so selfish. Sam, you can't even be bothered to make sure my one special day is perfect. The anger I'd been suppressing for months, years, began to boil over. I dropped the clipboard onto one of the pews and walked toward her. My hands clenched into fists at my sides. I've done everything you asked, I said, my voice shaking. Everything. I've been running myself ragged trying to make this day perfect for you. And all you've done is criticize and belittle me. Nothing is ever good enough for you. Rebecca, nothing. She blinked, clearly startled by my outburst. Sam, that's not. No, let me finish. I interrupted, my heart pounding in my chest. I've been bending over backwards for you, and you don't even see it. You think this whole wedding is about you, but it's not just about you. It's about us, about family, about people coming together, but you've turned it into some kind of performance. And you expect everyone around you to play their part perfectly. Well, guess what? We're human. We make mistakes. For a moment, Rebecca just stood there, staring at me like she didn't recognize me. Then, her face crumpled, and for a split second, I thought she might actually apologize. But instead, her expression hardened, and she crossed her arms over her chest. Maybe you're right, she said coldly. Maybe I should have asked someone else to be my maid of honor. Clearly, you're not up to the task. The words stung, but I didn't let them show. Instead, I turned on my heel and walked out of the church, leaving her standing there alone. I didn't go to the rehearsal dinner that night. I didn't answer her calls or her texts. I spent the evening alone, replaying the events in my mind, wondering if I'd been too harsh, if I should have just kept my mouth shut and powered through. But a part of me, the part that had spent years living in my sister's shadow, felt a sense of relief. For once, I had stood up for myself. The morning of the wedding, I expected her to be furious. I had mentally prepared for her wrath, for another berating, but when I arrived at the bridal suite, she was eerily calm. She didn't say a word to me as I helped her into her dress. As I pinned the veil into her hair, the silence between us was heavy, suffocating, but I didn't dare break it. As we stood together at the back of the church, waiting for the ceremony to begin, Rebecca finally turned to me. "Sam," she said quietly, her voice barely audible over the soft music playing in the background. "I'm sorry." I looked at her, surprised. "For what?" "For everything," she said, her eyes downcast. "I've been awful to you. I know that. I wanted everything to be perfect. And I guess I took it out on you. I'm sorry." It wasn't the apology I'd imagined. It wasn't grand or emotional. But it was enough. I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. "It's okay," I said, even though it wasn't. Not really, but it was a start. Rebecca smiled at me. An honest, genuine smile. And for the first time in months, I felt like maybe we could move past this. As the doors to the church opened and the music swelled, I took my place by her side, walking her down the aisle toward her future.